Welcome to PuppetConf. I hope you guys had great keynotes. If you were here yesterday for the Contributor Summit, that's awesome as well. Or if you're doing training, it's a big experience. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'm going to talk about getting started with Puppet. All of my slides are going to look like my child made them because I hate presentation software. So, welcome to PuppetConf. I'm at Stahnke on Twitter. Twitter is one of my favorite things in the world. I love to interact there. So if you want to follow me and ask questions, I'll try and answer them, or I'll make fun of you on the internet, or post a cat, things like that. A little bit about me. In 2005, I wrote a book called Pro OpenSSH. I really encourage you to buy it and then not read it. It's out of date, but I do love royalties. I also, in 2005, 2006, I worked on a project called EPEL. I was one of the founding members of that repository, working with 6 other people, both inside and outside of Red Hat. I also now work at Puppet Labs. I started using Puppet in around 2007. I run the team today that does all the release engineering, quality assurance, and security events and auditing at Puppet Labs. So I'm going to start with a little bit of Twitter interaction. I just want to know a little bit about you. What's your experience level with Puppet? Are you using it in production? Are you messing with it? Or do you have no experience? And if you just want to tweet at me, I'm going to read them later, and I'm going to be fascinated by it, because I like knowing more about the people that are using our software. The other thing I want to know is, what's your primary platform? Are you guys RHEL? Are you Debian? Are you Ubuntu? Are you using any Windows? Do you have any AIX in there? Because this type of data helps us make great decisions at Puppet Labs about what we do in the future. So tweet me, let me know. I'll look at it later. Thank you. So you come to a getting started talk, and you think, I'm going to learn all about how to do things with Puppet. Well, you're not going to in this talk. We're going to talk about why you do the things you do and what you do, and not necessarily how to do it. There are plenty of ways to get into how, and we will a little bit, but we're not going to go very deep on how. So what does automation really start with? When I started automating systems in 2002, 2003, I was writing janky shell scripts in Perl, and just a bunch of stuff that really wasn't that maintainable, wasn't very reusable. And the mindset just wasn't there for me. So what I want to talk about today are practices and patterns that will make you successful in a Puppet deployment. And really, it's just about automation. You could say it's Puppet. You could say it's Puppet with other solutions, a good monitoring tool, some good orchestration software, whatever it is that you need, be successful in your job and its patterns and practices. But the other thing is, tools are not enough. If you think you're going to buy a tool and magically all of your IT problems are going to go away, wrong. And that's just straight up. The sales guys may tell you otherwise, and they're right sometimes. But tools are not the only thing. So tools won't solve all your problems. What will is organizational behavior. And how do you impact that? You do. You're the one who can impact your organizational change. I give entire talks about this, and I'm really into it. It's all about DevOps and the progression of how you can change your organizational culture. This isn't that talk, but it's still super important. You need to understand that having the right mindset around automation will influence others and make them better as well. So why do we automate? Because we're lazy. No one likes to actually do work. I don't know if you know this. So really we do it because we want speed. You want things to go fast. That's what everybody thinks when you say, why would you automate something? I want speed. I want to solve the next problem. I'm done with that problem now. It's so fast, I'm on to the next thing, right? What I really wanted out of automation was consistency. I didn't really care how fast or how short or how long things took. What I wanted was, when somebody built a server, I didn't want to know who built it. Because it would be, if one person built it, it had Emacs on it, and it had 19 other extensions, and somehow Pulse Audio was configured to do something with Java. And if I went on to a different system, it was all VI, and there were extra packages. They had 18 version control systems, and Mercurial was running there, and I hated it. If I could log in and see who built the system based on RAID settings, based on FSTab, based on packages, it's wrong. I don't want to know anything about your personal opinions when I log into your systems. I just want them to work. I want them to be the same. I want them to be consistent. The other thing is, it gives you documented behavior. It gives you expectations for how the system should work. It means you have a baseline. You have a standard. You say all your systems should do blah. They should look like blah. What is blah? I don't know exactly for you. For me, it was making sure VI was there. It was making sure Git was installed. It was making sure that I had Ruby there so that I could run a set of tests. It was making sure I had monitoring software set up, backup software set up. All of that had to happen before I could hand it to an application team to use in any way. But it had to be done the same way. because chances were I was going to get a brand new college graduate who was suddenly going to be a magical Unix admin, and I needed to make them productive. Consistency. Documented behavior. And in the end, when you automate something, you get this radical sense of accomplishment. I still get this today, and I've been using Puppet, like I said, for like 7 years. When Puppet just kicks off a deploy, and I spin up an entire OpenStack cluster with it, it's fucking great. So, it's also about portability, right? So portability it's in that consistency theme where I can take this automation and I can hand it to somebody else. I can make the guy beside me productive using things that I did. It also means I don't have to worry about doing spelunking through a bunch of Perl code or old shell scripts or a bunch of things that were kind of my own maintenance nightmare, because you don't want my maintenance nightmare. I didn't want my maintenance nightmare. So what we do is we make it portable. You can talk about this. You can get training on it. You can buy books on it so that you can learn something and the person beside you can learn something, and you can both talk about it the same way and work on it the same way. And that's kind of a matter of pride in there with accomplishment. But really, it is to get to more interesting things. The reason we automate is because it's boring work. The work we're doing, we don't want to do again. I used to say that anything I had to do more than 3 times, I wanted to automate. I don't quite believe that today, but it's still not a bad rule of thumb to start with. So what do we automate? And what do you start with on automating? This is a beginner's talk. What do you start with? Well, obviously, you want to start with the highest value things available. And that is totally wrong. And the reason is, this stuff is super complex. So for every 25% increase in problem complexity, there's a 100% increase in solution complexity. And that's basically science because it's written down. So how complicated is it to automate something like an ERP system or a middleware cluster? Well, it's certainly not as easy as setting up passwords on systems. So can we get value lower in the stack before we're trying to drive through these massive, complex solutions? Again, get started. Get your feet wet. Don't dive right in. Check to make sure the pool has water in it. So I've developed this really, really complicated system to figure out what we should automate. It uses cost as one axis, and that's your time and complexity. And also cost has another component, which is failure impact. If it goes wrong, what happens? If I'm automating my account setup, if it goes wrong, I can't get into the box. That probably doesn't cost millions of dollars. If it goes wrong and I'm automating an ERP solution and it goes wrong, that probably does cost millions of dollars. So maybe not a good thing to start with. Frequency is also important. So on the value side, how often are you doing something? And how variable is it? Again, if statements lead to more complex problems, which lead to more complex solutions. If it's the same everywhere, it's great to automate. And also, it's like, who's going to benefit from the automation? Is it you? Is it your team? Is it a customer team? Is it your end customer that actually pays you money? It's tough to say, but those are the things you should factor into for value. And so what you can do is plot all of these great ideas onto this really complicated axis system, and you see that what we have are quadrants. I did not steal this from Gartner. So you have ERP up in the high cost, high value. Again, you'd love to get that value out of it, but the cost is so high, it's not the thing you want to start with. Middleware and databases are also very high value to automate, but very complicated, or can be very complicated. If you've ever tried to automate Oracle RAC, come tell me your horror story, because I love hearing them. So the things that are higher value, that are lower cost, are interesting, right? Backups, monitoring, syslog. What do all these have in common? They're nearly the same on every system. I have a syslog central server. I have a backup policy. Maybe it has a couple rules that are a little different per system, but the software is probably the same. My monitoring usually has a baseline policy that's roughly the same everywhere. And it's breadth. You're hitting breadth and not depth. So breadth is greater than depth to start with. And why is that? Because you're going to get more value faster. Fixing one thing across 10,000 servers is better than fixing 1,000 things on one server. Yeah. So that's really why you want to talk about breadth being greater than depth. And the other thing is, in an old world, you optimize for mean time between failure. You wanted to buy the highest available piece of hardware you could get to run this highly available app. And that's things like ERP systems and some middleware and some database clusters are still designed like this. They want to be fault tolerant. No, they don't want to have faults. That's hard to do. Faults happen. They're real. So what you actually want to do is worry about mean time to recovery, and that's where automation helps. Something goes wrong, detect a problem, fix it. Because you're going to have failures. Now, do you want your failures to be planned or unplanned? If they're unplanned, you need to have them recovered. So reduced variation is really one of the main reasons why we automate. We automate to get things consistent. If you're sensing a theme, that's okay. That's why you're here. You also want to do high-value things that are frequent and that go across your set of systems. All of your systems are important. All of your systems can be consistent. All of them can be the same. Whether all is 100 or 100,000, you want systems to be the same. If you have 100,000 and you're not automating seriously, you're totally doing it wrong. Low cost is important as well. So it's items you know. And by items you know, I mean automating something you understand. If you're automating something you don't understand, you're going to run into a new set of problems. And also fewer if statements. Again, reduce your complexity. So pick the right things to automate first. And to me, that's a lot of things that are kind of the standard sysadmin setups, the things I want everywhere. Now, is that going to be really sexy when you want to sell it to your manager and say, look at all this automation? Probably not. But it is going to get you quick wins, get you familiar with the tooling, and kind of help out your team, and your teammates will buy into it if they're not doing all those same system management tasks that they've done forever. So automate what you know. Again, the things I start with. What are the first things you do when a system comes online? And this was really where we started in a migration that I ran from CF Engine to Puppet and kind of how we wanted to do everything. And it was all about, what do you do when a system comes online? Why does it take so long? How can I get this out to the database team faster? And I came up with a list of all the things that I did. And a lot of it I did manually. And each one of these individually, somewhere between a minute and 3 minutes, maybe 30 seconds and 3 minutes. But you add them all together, and now I've saved maybe an hour, hour and a half off of each system build. Maybe it's an hour, I don't know. But you want to do things like add public IPs and Etsy hosts, install your favorite editor, set up your backups, like I said, configure SE Linux, which means turn it off in 99% of all cases. But what you want to do is just drive that value. Drive it outward to your team. Now, they don't have to worry about that. Now, your customers are receiving systems faster. They're configured the way they want them. So that's more valuable for them. How do we do any of this? I said this wasn't going to be a how talk, but I do have a how section. So the first thing is, with Puppet, you don't need to know Ruby. If you saw the keynote, we're actually moving away from Ruby for a lot of our stuff. So Ruby is not even, it's going to be less important in the ecosystem. And it's not that to say if you don't know Ruby, you won't be able to do things. You absolutely will be able to. Ruby bindings on CLibs are totally real. But you don't need to know Ruby to be productive. And that was one of the great things about Puppet early on, was I could hand it to people that had looked at configuration files, and they could be productive. They could describe, I want this package there, I need this service running, or I don't want it running ever. But we do have great resources available for learning. And in the how section, what you want to learn is puppetlabs.com/learning. Right? So we have online workshops, we have classes, we have a learning VM. If you guys haven't played with the learning VM, it's the single best resource we have. It's quest-based, so you do things and it gives you a little counter, like a stats in the corner in your terminal. It's pretty great. And the documentation is witty. I read through it about once a year and kind of learn something and laugh a little bit about the docs and things like that. It's not written like a dry tech doc that you're going to fall asleep to. And also we have the Puppet Forge, which is a great place to have examples. It's a great place to have pre-built modules that you can use. There's just tons and tons of resources there. From an editor perspective, we have an editor called Geppetto, which is an Eclipse-based editor that you can use to help you edit Puppet code. If you're more of an IDE type person, it'll fill in your curly braces properly, make sure they match, do syntax highlighting, do variable scoping, and things like that. It also can publish directly to the Forge if you're doing modules. So a little bit of syntax here. In VI, you can just do syntax highlighting. So if your favorite editor is much more like just a standard Emacs VI type thing, you have that. One of the things that I think really helps you learn how Puppet works is the RAL. The RAL stands for Resource Abstraction Layer, and it's honestly the bit of Puppet that made me choose Puppet over anything else out there. I never wanted to think about the way an operating system worked. I wanted to think about the way my servers should be, the way they end, what's the state they live in. So, is this big enough? Yeah, it's not too bad. On the top, basically what we have is me adding a user called Timmy, because whenever I test users, I use Timmy for some reason, and I have for years. But in the debug point, you can see that it kind of tells you what commands would it actually run to do this. And the RAL's abstracting that for me. This is on a Mac. I have no idea how to add a user on a Mac via the command line, but Puppet does. And I can see that by running it in no-op mode or in debug mode and just seeing what does it do, how does it work. You can learn a lot more about your operating system under the hood by just turning debug mode on Puppet. Also, there's a mode called no-op. No-op is basically simulating changes. It is, again, one of the very most powerful features of Puppet, and it's very different than any other system out there in that it's true no-op. But you can do things like, I want to see how things work. I want to see how things are going to happen. What was supposed to happen? And in this case, I'm looking at something that says, you know, is this package there? And you can see that it points right there. And if you turn on debug mode, you have dpackage query running. So I can remember that that's the command for this because I don't use Debian a ton. I'm a big rel Apple guy. And you know, it helps me with that. So beyond that, you have abstractions on other types of resources. You have users. This is users on a Mac or on a Linux system, and this is users on a Mac. Notice all I did was Puppet resource user Stahnke. I've actually written no code. I'm just querying Puppet to say, what's the system look like? What's there right now? And this can basically be copy-pasted right into a Puppet manifest, and now I can define that user elsewhere if I want to. There's also a thing called Puppet Describe. Puppet Describe is basically very detailed resource explanations. A resource is the building block of kind of Puppet, so file, package, resource, cron, service. Those are all users and groups, are all resources and kind of the baseline building blocks for describing how things work. Well, there's Puppet Describe that will tell you all about them. What parameters are there? What arguments can you pass? What can be required with them? So you want to do some automation, and you want to figure out, where do I start? How do I move on? Well, step one is obviously figure it out. And I love this slide because it tells you nothing. Figure it out is basically learn how something works. Don't learn two things at once. And this is a trap that I see people fall into all the time. They say, I want to play with brand new technology. For instance, I love React. When I wanted to learn how React worked, I was like, oh, I love React. I'm going to automate it. Let me tell you how well that went. I didn't understand anything about React, but I could automate it. So I had this really fast understanding of nothing. Didn't help. So, and the thing is, when things go wrong when you're trying to do that, you're trying to learn about something, you're trying to automate, where's the problem? Is it you? Is it your understanding? Is it the tool? Do you not know how to use Puppet? Is it the database? You don't know. So you want to control for variables. Automate something you know to start with. Learn about it. Figure it out. So you figure it out. Whether that's hacking, you know, I'm going to look at my shell history later and figure out how I made it work. I run everything in screen so I can record the session. You know, whatever it is, figure it out. Then you want to refine it a little bit. OK, let's take the happy path. Let's take out all the things I tried and undid and redid and all that. Take that out. And then I want to talk about how do I automate it. I want to declare my state. But I need to have a thorough understanding of it. If you don't, you're not going to be successful, at least early on. Later on, you might be able to grab something on the forge and be very successful with using somebody else's module, assuming it's well documented. But for learning, it's definitely about a three-step process: learning it yourself better, and then documenting it, declaring it in Puppet. So when you're troubleshooting and debugging, you kind of can ask yourself, what went wrong? Was it the system? Was it me? Did I make terrible assumptions? Did it only work on one computer and not all the computers? So I'm going to walk you through a real-world scenario of how to derive some value from Puppet. How many of you have controls that are something like this? You have a security policy that says, I'm not allowed to run RSH or rlogin, or I'm not allowed to run, I don't know, other services that are terrible, Telnet, FTP, anything clear text, because, hey, you can have my password. So this is a basic example of RSH and rlogin, and I realize this is kind of outdated because no one actually runs RSH and rlogin anymore unless you install AIX or HPUX. But so this is what it roughly looks like in terms of Puppet code. I can say this service needs to be stopped. This package should not be there. And that's just how it works. Now, I've given my resources kind of descriptive names, like disable RSH service and remove RSH server. And the reason for that is I can hand that to an auditor, and that reads roughly like plain English, which means I'm going to spend less time in the room with the auditor. That's a goal of mine. I don't like spending time in a room with auditors. I've done it enough. So you run through this, and you get kind of on the command line. You see a little bit, OK, I'm going to run it in no-op mode first. And apparently, I had RSH on here for demo purposes, obviously. And it's going to say, well, this should be stopped, and we would remove this package. Great. So now I can even go to a change control board and say, look, here's what would run. If I have a change ticket process, I have a change control board that I have to go get things approved ahead of time. I can say, here's the changes that we're planning to make. Here's my proof that it's going to work this way. People like that. You know, your ITIL people, your ITSM people, they like that. Your auditors like it because they understand it. You like it because hopefully you never talk to those people again. So I'm going to disable RSH. I'm going to remove the package. So in the GUI, it kind of pulls up and you say, OK, I have this disable RSH. So if you don't want to hand Puppet code to your auditors, you can also just show them a GUI report, right? The little yellow star in the corner means that it is a no-op run. Then you also get this in the Events tab, and you can say, enable, changed true to false. It was enabled, it's not anymore. I've also now removed it. You also have Event Inspector, and this is another way to kind of look at the same data. When you have lots of nodes, it actually can correlate changes together. So you might say, well, we were running our login on 200 of our 400 nodes, and here's what we had, and here's what the changes will be. It kind of rolls them up a little better. Also, it has a handy-dandy export to CSV file. Again, things auditors love. So we can help you with this, right? You can get real-world value very quickly by doing something that was 10 lines in Puppet, and now I can prove that I can make this change. I'm confident I can make this change, and hopefully I can go on to better things, which I think is what we said we wanted to do to begin with for automation. I want to not do this work again. So one of the other things you want to do is avoid complexity. It's really, really, really easy to get complex in Puppet. You think, I'm going to automate this, I'm going to add some if statements here, I'm going to have data coming in from over here, I'm going to inject it over here, and suddenly you've built a mousetrap that you can't understand. If you don't understand it, the person that you work with won't understand it either. So some of the things you can do to make this a little simpler is in the recent versions of Puppet, we have something called manifest ordering. It used to be you had to be explicit about all ordering and requirements, which meant if I was going to turn off a service, the first thing I had to do was make sure that that service resource required the package resource to be there, because otherwise the service wouldn't work, because there wouldn't be a package that provided the service. In the newer versions of Puppet, if you just have package as the first thing and service as the second, it'll just parse it in top-down order. So you don't have to necessarily declare dependencies explicitly. I like the idea of declaring dependencies explicitly because it's more correct and because it's more deterministic with somebody else reading your code. But if it's easier to share code, it's also a win. So one of the other things that can lead to complexity is knowing where your data comes from. Where does your data come from? How is data formed? It's, you can have Hira, you can have an ENC, you can have our new node manager that we talked about this morning, which is pretty great for a source of data. But what you don't want to do is mix and match. What you don't want to do is I have a bunch of data in my params pp file, a bunch of data in Hira, I have a bunch of data in NC, and then you run a complex catalog that's managing maybe only 4 or 5 things, and you can't figure out how this variable got populated. What happened to it? I've done this. It's been a pain. So figure out a data strategy early, and you may have to change it, but try and stick with one. Try and have an idea of where you're going with how your data gets into modules. Data is things like host names, IP addresses, service names, technical approvers, just things that you can't necessarily only derive from the system itself. It's sometimes business rules. And iteration is going to happen because you're going to get it wrong sometimes. Ask me how I know. Iteration's going to go. Iteration means you're learning. Iteration means you're trying hard. It means you're working on these things. So one of my favorite ways to look at should I automate this, like I said earlier, I used to have a mantra that if I'm going to do this more than 3 times, it needs to be automated. That is not a great idea. In fact, it's kind of bullshit. The issue is if automation takes longer than actually doing the task, it's not worth it. And I know that as systems people, you're like, but I want to automate it. It's going to be the best. It's not. And I know this because we do UI testing. I own one of the teams that does all the UI testing at Puppet Labs. It turns out our UI changes kind of a lot. Automating it is very difficult. You automate it for one version, and then we have the next release come out. All of that automation that I just spent months investing on needs to be thrown away because the UI is different. It's a terrible investment for automation. Don't do it. There's other things that you think, I'm going to automate this one thing that I'm going to do one time. There might be good reasons to do that if it has to go perfectly, if it has to have step 1, step 2, and it has to be audited by other people. There are reasons to do it, but time savings might not be it. Don't get caught in the trap of, I'm going to automate everything for no good reason. The alt text on that XKCD comic is one of my favorite things ever. Because automating comes from the roots of auto, meaning self, and mating, meaning screwing. Because sometimes automating is just terrible. It's really difficult. So, who do you automate for? Well, who gets the benefits of your automation? Is it you? Is it your team? Is it your customers? Is it your end customers who pay money? Internal customers? Who gets those benefits? The idea is everybody gets these benefits, because what you want to do is have a higher velocity of change. You want to be able to move faster. And you can do this with confidence if you understand how things happen. Can you show what will happen? So, I used to have a high fear of change. I didn't, my organization did. I wasn't afraid of much. But a high fear of change. Why? Because I didn't know what was going to happen. When I change this, if I disable RSH, does that mean everything in the engineering data center just goes down? Turns out, yes, that's what that meant in 2002. Ask me how I know. I didn't have a tool like this. I didn't have a tool to tell me that if I close RSH in this giant engineering data center, all engineering drawings cannot communicate with the central server. That's bad. I had 3,000 engineers that had to not work for a while. So, what would I have known? Well, this service used to talk over here, monitoring would have alerted. This service used to talk over here, this change is going to happen. Oh, I didn't know we were running RSH there. The report would have showed up, hey, we're going to shut this off, we're going to shut this off, we're going to shut this off. Oh, so now I have more confidence in my changes. That's velocity, and that's impact. I have customers getting things out of this because they're not getting downtime. I'm able to move faster. I can upgrade their OS. I can change what services are running. My team understands it because they can see it's a portable change. I can read about the change. It's kind of documented behavior. Portability. I think I already said that. And another thing is kind of having checks and balances. One of the big, I hate the word anti-pattern, but I'll say anti-pattern, that I've seen is people doing what I would call a suicide commit. And that's you commit something to your version control in Puppet, and it just goes out to production. Whee! It's so fun. Have you ever broken multiple systems at once? It's a great time. I highly recommend it if you don't like sleep. So get your commits, whether that's somebody else is doing a review on them, whether that's we have to do a no-op run first so we can see how it behaves. Just you want to make sure your changes are thought about. Sometimes the most innocuous change is the one that just kills you. So get your commits. Also, really try and use no-op mode to understand what's going to happen. So start simple, stay simple. It's important. The more complex you get, the harder the problem is to understand, the harder it is to share. The solutions become very difficult. I like to build small, single-purpose modules. And one of the reasons I do that is because, again, they're easy to share, they're easy to understand. You can kind of think of this as the microservices paradigm that's kind of in the software architecture world really taking off right now, which was kind of just a renamed SOA. But anyway, microservices are there. Small, single-purpose building blocks. It's a lot easier to understand. I want to build a 3-tier application with modules that are how the web server works, how the database server works, and how the app server works than one giant WordPress module that takes care of all those things, sort of. Or only in this exact case, or I can't share. I wanted to use my own module to take care of the web server because I have a different security policy than the guy who wrote the WordPress module does. Think of that. You want them composable. And one of the things that I think shows the success there is that, this is not my handwriting, by the way, is that one of the 12 Puppet approved modules we launched today, I had one of them that was the EPEL module. Again, I said I was an EPEL, but it's a very, very small module. It does one thing. It sets up the EPEL repository on enterprise Linux systems. But people use it all the time. It's the 3rd most downloaded module on the Forge. Why? Because it's very, very simple. Everybody can understand it. Everybody can share with it. So, also what you should do is have a lab. Play with this stuff in a non-production place. And I know you're thinking, wow, this guy's telling me absolutely nothing I don't know. I've seen people just do this stuff in production. It's dumb. Don't. Have a lab. Re-image it. Blow it back up. See if it can get it back to the same state. Version your code. These are just normal ideas. Version your code. Most of us use Git at this point in Puppet Labs, and we have some tools that are starting to integrate with Git as a version control system. If you use Subversion, that's fine. If you use ClearCase, I guess okay. You must have a lot of money. Come talk to me. We'll sell you more things. So version your code. Versioning your code ends up versioning your infrastructure. You can say, 2 weeks ago, we would have done this. Today, we're doing this. What changed? When things do go wrong, because inevitably they still will, you have kind of an archaeology archaeology, finding, I don't know, you have some stuff to go look through. Feedback loops are also important. Whether it's monitoring, whether it's testing ahead of time, whether it's users just yelling at you and telling you things didn't go well, it's very important. And I like to do, the other thing that I usually throw into feedback loops is working with your team. If you have a team of 4, 6, 10, 12 sysadmins, ask them what's going well with our automation, what's not, what changes do we roll out, which ones don't we? How do we get better? And again, this is a concept borrowed from development. I can do a retrospective with a team to drive continuous improvement. That's part of feedback. And that's a softer side of thing that's not necessarily part of the hard skills of learning Puppet. So we do have some testing and feedback tools. Beaker is kind of the main testing tool that most people are using right now for modules, and it's also the same tool we use. Internally, we use Beaker to test all the modules that we support or approve. We also use it to test Puppet Enterprise end-to-end, test Puppet end-to-end before it goes out for open source releases. It's a testing framework. It's not the easiest thing to use ever, but it is very, very powerful. And if you want help on that, there is a talk on this, I think it's later today, but it's from Alice. She's the primary author of Beaker at this point. She's the maintainer for sure. And you can learn more about testing there. You know, having a monitoring system do feedback is also okay. One of the things that I used to like to do was just, if a system was out of compliance, just, you know, throw an alert. Let's drop in my email, let's see why. And sometimes, even though Puppet was going to fix it a half an hour later, what I wanted to know was, why was it changing? Did somebody write a cron job that was just, you know, kind of at odds with my Puppet policy? Or was there just some sysadmin or some DBA that had sudo who was just going to go do whatever he wanted, and it was kind of becoming a pattern, and I needed to solve a problem there? So, again, with the automation mindset, there is no such thing as an automatic factory. There's no such thing as everything being automated. If there was, literally there wouldn't be computer operators. There wouldn't be operations people. There probably wouldn't be developers because computers did it all for you already. There's just degrees of automation, so pick the right things. Now, this is the fun part of the talk, where it's, here's the things that can go absolutely wrong. I hate the word best practices. Actually, I kind of love it, but only in an ironic way, because I like to declare everything a best practice. Best practices are a sucker bet, and the reason is, if it's best and everybody's doing it, by definition, it's not the best, it's the same. Right? You either want to be so far above the best practice or normal practice that you're getting a ton out of things, or you want to invest nothing in it because you don't even care. So, best practices. So I like worst practices. They're way more fun. So, one of the worst things you can do is have a bunch of automation and not evolve or move any of your operational processes. And the ones that are the hardest to move and influence are the ones that are outside of your team. When you have a problem, what do you do with manual changes? Do you log in? Do you SSH in and still make a change? I automated all this stuff, but now I'm just going to go, you know, log in and change this thing. Oh, crap, now I have a system that's not like all the others. That's a problem. My change control board doesn't trust the automation. I can't use it. They make me come in on Saturday night at midnight and go touch this thing and do this. I mean, you need to work with those teams to understand automation. It's more reliable. The security team says, you can't run this thing because it's an agent on the box. And I say, well, you can come in and do this then. You know, I need automation. And audits and inventory are another one too, where, you know, your inventory changes because you're spinning up and spinning down nodes, you're automating different things. Maybe you're doing some kind of elastic scale, and then like your inventory people are like, we don't know what assets are in the room and blah, 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 blah. And those are just older processes that haven't evolved. As you automate things, you have to help evolve those processes. Not all of that is easy and or fun. It's actually kind of terrible in certain cases. But there's a lot of precedents already out there for how to do some of this stuff. So again, if you hit our blog, or if you go on mailing lists, or Google some stuff on how to evolve some of these operational processes, you can definitely find it. I recommend it. Another thing is borrowing code. If you borrow code from somebody, or you pull it off of GitHub, and you import it, and you say, this is my module now. One of my least favorite things to see is somebody that just rm-rf the Git directory, or like the old SVN history. If you don't know why somebody put something together the way they did, the chances of you being able to debug it successfully are worse. They're much worse. Another one's kind of the works on my machine paradigm. You know, I spun it up in this Vagrant box in my machine, and everything worked fine, and then I go out to production, and it doesn't work. How are you modeling and mirroring production? How are you knowing that it works? It's also, I hard-coded this host name, so it had to be running on this one node that was VPN into this other network. I mean, and I've seen all this. You need to think about kind of where does it actually need to run in the real world. Another one is just, what do you rename your ops team to? Obviously, if you just rename your ops team to the DevOps team, like, you're next level, right? And that's not how it works. Even if you call it an automation team or a tools team, renaming ops isn't the answer. You want to have operations become a better team. You want them to evolve process, but it might be that you're involving development, you're involving application owners, application customers. When we say DevOps, a lot of people think, I don't actually have developers. I have a bunch of people that run WebSphere applications or SAP or, basically they're people that call an 800 number when something goes wrong, they administer something, they start and stop services. In this world, those are your devs. Those are the people that you have to work and understand their business. If you don't understand a little bit about their job, you're not going to be good at helping them with their job. If you're not good at helping them with their job, why are you there? Computers are there to make your life better and their life better, and therefore to make you money, which again makes your life better. So, another thing is avoid new hotness syndrome. And this is one of those things where everybody's like, I'm going to switch tools to this, or I'm going to switch to this, or I'm going to spin up this and that, and I'm not even going to say some of the tools just because I don't want to give them any more hype than they already have. But it's basically just, I want to go play with this new thing. That doesn't necessarily drive value for you or your customers. Now, sometimes it does because you're like, this is a problem I've had. I think this tool can solve it. Please go do that. That's different. Investigation and how to solve a problem is one thing. Just playing with tech for the sake of playing with it is something, frankly, it's fun. You should go do it. But it doesn't belong in kind of your mainline production automation stream. So the warnings to kind of watch out for is going too meta too early. And that means basically the first thing I try and automate is my automation system. And we'll talk about that in a second. Not automating things that don't save time. If you're not actually saving time, you might be investing in the wrong areas for automation. And then also not delivering value. I've automated that thing that we never do. Great. And also making it not sustainable. So if it's too complicated, to share or work with others, that automation rots. And I have seen bit rot from automation in Puppet code or in other tools where the main person that wrote all of this complicated code either goes to a new job, wins the lottery, gets hit by a bus, whatever you want to say, and now the rest of the team has to go figure out, how do I work with all of that? I don't understand it. You want to make sure that it's composable and portable so that other people can help. So, if you take one message away from this talk, this is it. Do not automate your automation system as your first project. Seriously. Do not automate your automation system as your first project. I run the team and ran the team that runs the Puppet Enterprise installer and does all the bootstrapping problems and stuff, and it's fucking hard. So do not do this. And there's a reason why. Best case scenario, you're amazing and you succeed. What have you accomplished? Nothing. You have an automation system that's delivering no value to anyone, but you can redeploy it all day long. Deliver value elsewhere. Deliver value anywhere else than your automation system to start with. Being able to bootstrap your automation system is a great thing. Like, you should be able to do it eventually. It's not where you start. Seriously, that's the one message I want you to take away. Do not automate your automation system as your first project. Also, try not to automate a bad process. A lot of people get all caught up in the tech and don't think about what's actually happening. A bad process gives you bad results, but faster, which is awesome if you like piles of shit. See, this is what happens when I start talking. So, all right, so fallacies of automation are I can automate that. If you believe you can automate every single thing, you're probably right, but you don't have the right comprehension of what you need to do for your job. I can automate racking and stacking servers. I don't have an army of robots. Therefore, it's going to be difficult. I don't have to know specifics. I can just go automate this thing, and magic, my problems are all gone. That's not really what you want to do. You want to understand it. This goes back to the don't learn two things at once paradigm. Understand what you're automating before you automate it. Understand how it works. And finally, the last fallacy of automation is that it leads to headcount reduction. And I've been in this space I've been at Puppet Labs for just over 3.5 years. I've been in the space for another 4 or 5 before that when I was really into automation and doing DevOps talks and all that kind of stuff. And I literally have never seen someone lose a job because of automation in systems. I've seen a few people slide over and have a slightly different role. I think that's a goal. If you just have to sit there and swap out backup tapes every day, do you want that job forever? No, you slide over, okay, now I'm doing more with monitoring. I'm doing more proactive work instead of reactive work. I've just never seen anybody be like, oh, we automated that, and then we fired 18 systems guys. What? That doesn't happen. There used to be a rule where I worked that if you automated yourself out of a job, it was an automatic promotion. That's the right way to think about these problems. So, in summary, why do we automate? Consistency and time savings, basically. We talked about a lot of other stuff, but these are the two things that actually matter. Consistency and time savings. What do we automate? Things that are high value and low cost items first. Now, eventually, do you want to automate that complex ERP solution? Yes. Do you want to automate upgrades of Oracle RAC? Yes. And then go drink heavily. What don't we want to automate? Oh, yeah, that's the right answer. The automation system. Please, please, please do not choose that as your first topic. And how do we do it? Well, there's puppetlabs.com/learn, which has tons of resources for you to help. There's also training classes and many, many other things, books. And it's also by driving value up the stack. Make somebody else see the value of Puppet. And that's things like going to a change control board and saying, these changes are what's going to happen. Going to a security team and saying, I'm protecting against this policy 100% of the time, and here's how I know. Those are all great things. You'll automate this for your business goals. If you understand what your app teams are doing, what your developers are doing, you can align with the business. You'll be better at your job. You'll be happier even. If you are not interested in the business of where you work, you might want to look and find some place where you would be. It's really hard to be amazing at technology when you don't care about what the technology is doing and why it's there. Also, eliminate yourself as a single point of failure. Some people see job security as, I'm the only person that can do this. That's old. That's old school. I like to take vacation. I don't want to look at my email. I don't want to get paged when I'm not in the office. That's why I hire teams of people to do work, so they can share, it's portable, it's reusable. And also watch out for traps. Keynote being able to do animated GIFs was a total game changer. Watch out for traps. All those warnings we just talked about, all those worst practices, make sure you're paying attention. Don't get too complex. Don't automate your automation system. So that's really what I have to say. Again, you can tweet me if you want. I'm pretty interactive there. The other thing is, because I swear on stage and I'm really not supposed to, I do donate every time I swear to the ADA initiative to make sure that we help a little bit with this problem we have in technology. But that's what I have to say. I think we have time for a couple questions, because I actually don't see a clock of what time it is at all. So it's 11:45? 11:45. Sweet. That was like perfect in the timing. Any questions? Yeah, in the front. Gating commits was what I mentioned. Yeah, basically what you want to do is know about the change before you put it in. So gating is all about, gating is a term that is just kind of generic, and you put a gate in front of something so it can't move. Put a gate on the commit so that we say things like, I don't want this commit to happen. You make a commit to change the way sudoers works, and it goes out to 1,000 systems, but you actually accidentally have a syntax error. Now I have sudo that doesn't work on 1,000 systems. It's terrible. Ask me how I know. So what you want is something that gates it. Whether it does a syntax validation, it's a secondary person looking over your commit before it goes through. Even a pull request, you can't merge your own pull request kind of deal. Have some type of review. Suicide commits are literally suicide. So any other questions?
You're talking about worst practices. One of your points on your slide was inventory. I didn't hear you talk about that.
Yeah, inventory is kind of the issue. So his question was, worst practices, I had a little sub-bullet called inventory, and I didn't mention it much. It's basically kind of your system's not evolving to understand you have an elastic environment, or I'm going to spin up 18 new VMs. Do they have to check into an inventory service? Do you have to have a central asset database? That kind of process that I think was very, very prominent 10 years ago, today doesn't work the same way when you're trying to automate things and you're spinning up new capacity on demand and things like that. Maybe you have an API to check into an inventory service. That's very different than I have to fill out a form and hand it to the asset management people, blah, 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 barcode kind of stuff. Yeah. You're going to have to yell.
Would you recommend playing with Puppet in a cloud-based environment to start off, and even in like a lab environment?
Sure. Yeah, the question was, do you recommend playing with Puppet in a cloud environment? Yeah, I learned it on VMs totally. In the cloud, it's great. There are a couple weird things in the cloud just because the way signing is handled with certificates, but you can either turn on auto sign or you can actually do like pre-shared keys now with signing certificates. So the way everything communicates in Puppet is it's client server model, it's encrypted using SSL. So that can be a little bit of a trickier thing in the cloud because you have a public IP and a private IP, but if you can get past that, it's no different than anywhere else. Yes? I'm not sure I understand the question, I'm sorry.
Puppets, when you set it up, clients check in like every half hour. Is that still the best way to go when you're learning?
Okay, so the question is when you're learning, Puppet by default checks in every half an hour to see if there's any changes to make to apply a policy, right? And his question is that the best way to do this while you're learning? The thing that I usually do is just kick off Puppet runs manually all day while I'm working on automating. You know, I make a change, Puppet agent-t, make a change, Puppet agent-t. I'll just keep running it over and over and over again, multiple times a minute sometimes if I have to. So that's iteration. So I think we're out of time. Are we? I don't know who's running the room. Are you, Nick? Are you running the room? No. Okay, you don't know. I think we're out of time. I'll be around. You can come find me. I can talk about this stuff all day long, and I will talk about it all day long. You can be a part of it if you want to. Thanks so much.